So in this last clip on the IVC, we're going to focus on what we don't know about the Indus Valley civilization and talk a bit more about some of the kind of wild speculations that scholars have made about its culture. There are basically four different mysteries we're going to talk about. One, the religious life of the IVC. Two, how the IVC declined or died out. And three, the ethnic or racial identity of the IVC. And then last but not least, the great mystery of its undeciphered script. Now, most discussions of religion in the Indus Valley have concentrated on one thing in particular. This fellow you see right here, seated in the solemn meditative posture that reminds many people of the ancient Indian practice of yoga. He looks to be naked. In some of the seals, it seems that he is ichthyphallus, which meaning that he's got an erect penis. And he's always wearing a headdress made of buffalo horns and some kind of frond or tree branch in the middle. He's also depicted wearing arm bracelets all the way up both arms, and he's usually seated on a pedestal of some sort. In some seals, like the ones you see here, he's flanked by different beasts. All of these details led scholars all the way since the time of John Marshall in the 1920s to speculate that this is actually an early form of Shiva, the great Hindu god, in his manifestation as Pashupati, or Lord of Beasts. So the seal often gets called the Proto-Shiva, or the Pashupati seal, or maybe the Great Yogi seal, and is thought to reflect the kinds of core values that IVC religious life would have held, right? Spiritual power as a way to control social life and also to gain an upper hand over those beasts of nature. There's also the possibility that the seal may not have been religious at all, but it was a kind of sign of a king or a chief, right, wearing a crown. No matter what, though, he wasn't just an ordinary guy, but a man with some kind of power. There's another possibility that it's not connected to Hinduism, and we're going to be talking about another ancient religion of India called Jainism, whose 24th and final Tirthankara, or enlightened soul, lived around 500 BC. The practitioners of the Jain religion claim to have a much longer pedigree than that, though. And maybe this is an image of their original founder, Rishabha, whose name actually means bull. Who knows? This is all speculation, so why not? Maybe that's Rishabha, the bull, the Jain. Here's a couple of more images that have gripped the thoughts of scholars speculating on the IVC religion. I personally feel less confident about these speculations than the one about Proto-Shiva, but you're welcome to have your opinion. At one IVC site called Kalibangan in Rajasthan, archaeologists uncovered evidence of these fire pits you see here, which has some people speculating, of course, that they maybe Vedic fire sacrifices had taken place at the site during the Indus Valley period, at a time that's supposed to be that, the standard story is that it's before the Vedic culture. The basic problem is that these pits look far more crude and haphazardly made than the highly elaborate and very precise constructions of Vedic fire altars. We're going to get to those in a couple of weeks. But for me, it gets this kind of speculation is way too into sort of wishful thinking rather than any kind of meaningful inference from the evidence. The other thing people have speculated on is the meaning that all those female figurines take on, right? Do they represent fertility goddesses, and so on? And some people have also said that these phallus and vulva-like objects represent Shiva's linga and yoni. This also seems kind of a stretch to me, but again, it's just what some people think. Besides religion, a second area where speculation gets really wild and really heated has to do with the identity of the citizens of the IVC. Who were they, right? Us moderns tend to think of ethnic identity as defined first and foremost by race, but it seems more likely that in the Indus Valley, social identity was worked out a bit differently than it is today. First of all, the whole area itself wasn't one monolithic culture, but it was kind of a conglomeration of at least 3 or 4 distinct culture zones. Punjab, Sindh, Gujarat, Saraswati River. Each of these would have had distinct lifestyles, probably their own ways of dress and food and so on. A lot like India is today, in fact, right? So very regionally defined. Their meeting points were in these big cities where these different communities would trade, have commerce, live together, engage in different kinds of transactions, right? It was cosmopolitan. It was a multicultural milieu. And one idea is that these identities where they came from were marked by those things like those seals, where different animals might have stood for different clans or sodalities. But again, it's all speculation. But the one popular notion is that the Indus culture was old Dravidian culture, which could have been true, of course. But who's to say that the cosmopolitanism of the Indus Valley didn't also include the predecessors of these people we call the Aryans, the pastoral speakers of Sanskrit, or maybe some other older Indo-European language before Sanskrit, they did fire rituals and tended to horses and cattle. Maybe their culture took off in the Punjab and then spread to the rest of India after these big cities collapsed. So how did these big cities collapse, right? Because they did collapse. After the year 1900 BC, in the archaeological record, there's a marked decline all over the entire region in the populations and inhabitation levels in these big cities. And eventually they get abandoned completely by about 1500 BC. They were gone. Beginning with Wheeler, the popular explanation had been that a group who called themselves the Aryans and who rode on horses and had a warlike kind of character came into India and devastated these cities with their superior military prowess. They replaced these old Dravidian this IVC culture with their own Vedic practices of fire rituals and Sanskrit recitations. There is, however, absolutely no evidence for this kind of invasion. No horse remains, no scenes of mass violence or destruction or war or anything like that. Instead, the more kind of likely, sensible scenarios were either some kind of overcultivation of the land, mismanagement of the water that happens all the time in India. As we see, this happened in the demise of the Mayans, for example, in Latin America. Maybe some catastrophic disasters like massive flooding of the Indus. There's also evidence for this. The river itself is notoriously jumpy, actually, and changes its course every so often. So if the river moved far enough away from the city of Mohenjo-daro, its only source for water would be gone and it would quickly become uninhabitable. Similar things seems to have happened at the Saraswati River, for example, where hundreds of sites seem to have been abandoned because the water disappeared. But it's all just a mystery, one more in the long line of mysteries about the Indus Valley civilization. Now, our final mystery is maybe the biggest of all, and maybe the key to unlocking all the other mysteries if we can ever solve this one, and it has to do with the language that the people would have spoken in the Indus Valley and the script with which the language was written down. The script is still undeciphered, although a lot of people have claimed to have deciphered it. You'll find on the internet there's many different solutions, but none of them are very convincing. It had been popular to speculate that the language was related to Old Tamil, and nowadays among the more kind of nationalistic Hindu scholars, there's a chauvinistic conceit that it might be related to Sanskrit. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But all of these theories are kind of, they don't really inspire confidence. They all seem speculative. The main thing we're missing to be able to solve the puzzle is any kind of bilingual inscription like a Rosetta Stone, which had helped to decipher the Egyptian hieroglyphs, for example. There's no way to verify if any of these speculations are correct. About the script itself, there's a ton of inscribed objects to be found, over 3,000 objects. There are 400 or more different characters that have been isolated. That means it was probably more like Chinese than Roman script. It's more like not really an alphabet, but maybe pictographic. Like Chinese or even like Roman script, it could have been used to record more than one language. So even if we could read it, we wouldn't necessarily know the language that it was encoding. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Scholars have noticed that it has some signs that have correspondences actually to the Mesopotamian scripts, which could conceivably be a good starting point for unlocking the IVC script. And there's some speculation that the IVC language could be related to another isolated language in the Middle East that's called Linear Elamite. But unfortunately, that language, Linear Elamite, is also undeciphered. So even if they were related, it wouldn't really help us to understand it. So as you can see, the script issue is perhaps the biggest obstacle to really getting to know what was going on out there in Harappa in 2500 to 1900 BC. Until then, we're kind of stuck digging in the dirt, making wild guesses about the things we find, and just hoping that the jigsaw pieces can somehow fit together to form a meaningful picture of that most ancient layer of Indian cultural history. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time when we discuss more ancient mysteries from the Indian past.